At one point, instructors might have looked at educational developers sort of like suspiciously, like, "What do you guys know?" You know. But I think that has changed. So,
Welcome to Time to Discuss. Before we get started, I want to thank Mickey Mickelson for introducing me to our next guest. Let's meet Mark Morton because it's time we discuss what it's like to be an educational developer. Mark, thank you for
hey,
joining me today.
my pleasure. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. This is cool. So, I've never heard of an educational developer. I know, we did a little bit of back and forth. I understand that you
Yeah,
basically work with professors or teachers to help them teach better, essentially. But
yeah,
let's talk
yeah.
about that a little bit more. What exactly does an educational developer do?
I'll start with the my elevator explanation, which is basically an educational developer is like a teacher of teachers, or in my case, I teach professors at a university here in Canada. They don't just work with individual instructors or professors. They also work with programs, sometimes with the institution as a whole, because, well, let's say, during the pandemic when everybody had to start teaching remotely, the educational developers had to figure out how to help instructors make that shift. Sometimes we're also called instructional developers.
When you're doing this, do you get involved at all with like the pedagogy, or no, this is strictly you're working with the professors and that's it?
We deal a lot with pedagogy. We often don't use that actual word though, because some people think it's like too, I don't know, too fancy, too pedantic, So we just talk about teaching and learning. At the teaching center where I work at the University of Waterloo, I have about 25 colleagues who work in our teaching center. It's called the Center for Teaching Excellence. And we all have different things that we focus on. So my particular thing that I focus on is educational technologies. Any kind of technology, apart from pencils and pens, that can help make learning and teaching more effective. That's what I focus on. I have other colleagues who focus on curriculum, other ones who consult directly with instructors, other ones who focus on assessment. So, I mean, we're lucky because we have one of the largest teaching centers in Canada, probably even in North America, I think. And so we can sort of specialize in that kind of way. I know of other teaching centers, where there's like three people working there and they pretty much have to do everything, so that would be hard.
How easy is it from a person in your position to move from one specialization to another? Is it pretty seamless, pretty easy, or it's a little challenging?
Within the field of educational development, I think it's good to be able to move within the different sort of subfields, and I think that's certainly supported, if not encouraged.
That's awesome. That's good to hear. So if someone's, they like to mix things up a little bit. They want to try to navigate around a little bit. That sounds like
Yeah.
it's pretty easy to do and encourage. That is awesome. Now, how about a typical day for you? What's that like? Or a typical week? 'Cause I know a lot of times people will say, well, no day
Yeah,
is
yeah.
typical. So what are some of
You're
the
right.
common
And even a week might not be, because there's the different rhythms of each term or semester. I guess the first thing I would say is that my own rhythms tend to sort of be the inverse of the professors, because when the professors are really, really busy, beginning of term, end of term, things like that, they don't have time for people like me. Um, and so that's when I tend to be less busy. But my typical week, I would spend some time probably doing some research into some new educational technologies that I might have heard about. But even that, I've been doing this for about 20 years. And even that has changed in that time, because when I first started working as an educational developer, and before that I was a professor at another university, but when I first started working as an educational developer, a lot of my focus was on learning technologies because, online learning was still a fairly new kind of thing. Things like clickers that I mentioned were new, blogs. I can't even recall if blogs existed yet. Podcasts didn't exist. And certainly the kinds of software that's like what we're using right now, Zoom and Microsoft Teams and things like that, that didn't exist. And so there was a lot of kind of churn, a lot of really exciting technologies that arose. Some of them then vanished. Um, but I would say maybe in the past 7 or 8 years, we've kind of reached the state with educational technologies where they're all really pretty good, and at that point you can maybe perfect things, but it's hard to do something revolutionary. I kind of think it's maybe similar to smartphones. All smartphones are really, really pretty good now. you're not going to get an update that's going to go, holy mackerel, how can this is so different? It's going to be more gradual, incremental improvements at this point. So I actually focus less on learning technologies now than I used to. The other thing too is that, the current crop of professors at most universities, the ones who've joined over the past 20 years, they themselves have often come through university programs where they have been using learning technologies and they have benefited from teaching centers. So they're just a lot more savvy, a lot more equipped than they used to be. And I think too, that in turn means that they're more open to working with educational developers than many faculty members used to be. Like I think it would be fair to say that at one point instructors might have looked at educational developers sort of like suspiciously, like, what do you guys know? But I think that has changed. So, get back to your question. What does my typical week look like? Well, there's a lot of meetings in it, because I have to, we have to be aware of what my colleagues are doing and a lot of email to deal with. One other aspect, like I sort of have sub aspects to my job as well. I look after communications for our teaching center, and then of course I'm on a lot of other committees elsewhere in the university. Like for example, our library system is sort of the spearheading something called Open Educational Resources, which is where it's sort of a movement to get instructors to encourage instructors to create their own textbooks, basically, and then make them freely available. And so, I'm on that committee, for example. I'm on other committees that are dealing more with, let's say, the hardcore aspects of technology. And, I'm not very good on that. I don't know what makes I don't know anything about code. I don't know anything about computer coding. So I'm just kind of there, just trying to stay up to speed. Um, I guess I guess in short, what I'd say is that I do a lot of different things, and that's what I really enjoy. It's not like every week it's going to be the same old thing. And you have to be able to pivot, because you never know what's going to come up. Like, for example, okay, give you one more example. What was it, about 2 years ago? It seemed like all of a sudden artificial intelligence just came out of the blue. I mean, it didn't, obviously. But all of a sudden, our teaching center and teaching centers, I think everywhere, all of a sudden had to pivot. Like, how are we going to, on the one hand, leverage this new technology of artificial intelligence? And on the other hand, how are we going to try to make sure that it's not abused by students or instructors? So we had to come up with protocols, different ways that instructors could um, integrate it into their teaching, because I think that trying to ban it is just that's not going to work. You can't. Maybe you can somehow do that on campus, but students go home, they go back to their residences. They're going to use. So I think the thing to do is try to get students to understand that you don't want they you don't want to use this to cheat, to cut corners, because ultimately you're short, what's the word, short, you're diminishing your own education by doing that. And so, yeah, everything, every every aspect of education, and probably most things in life, I think, should be about educating people as opposed to legislating things.
So many
Yeah.
interesting things you just said there. So I was speaking with author Brad Anderson,
Hmm.
and his video hasn't gone live yet. By the time your video goes live, his will be in the distant past.
Right,
Um,
right.
but
Okay.
but he was a sci-fi author,
Hmm.
and a professor. He actually talked about biotech. He's a
Yeah, yeah.
biotech episode for anyone keeping score.
Hmm.
And he talked about the idea of the open textbooks, and how
Yep.
he was in favor of that, and his institution was doing that. And one of his books was an open textbook as well. Really,
Hmm.
really cool. I love that idea.
Hmm.
And then talking about AI, and you're absolutely right. I agree. It's not going, and you can't get rid of
Hmm.
it. It's already the genie's out of the bottle. That's not
Exactly.
going anywhere.
Yep.
So you have to kind of embrace it and just kind of, like you're saying, kind of formulate, guidelines around it so people can
Yeah.
use it in the best way possible as a
Yep.
tool. In my opinion, as a tool would be the best way.
Yep. Yep.
So very, very interesting. It sounds like you were probably a professor first, and then
Yes.
you became an educational developer. Is
Yeah.
that what happened initially?
That's exactly right. Like I did a PhD in 16th century English non-dramatic literature at the University of Toronto. So, a fairly specialized field. And then I taught 16th century literature and other kinds of literature courses, first courses, drama courses, things like that, at a couple of different universities. And then at the last university where I taught, um, they had what they called telecourses, which was, where the instructor goes into a studio, and it's an actual studio, but there's, desks or students, tables there for students, about 30 students to sit at. And then it's also being videotaped and broadcast on TV. So students can take it at home at the same time. So I had about 30 students in the studio, and then I had about another 70 students who were taking it from home. And then I also like this. Anybody could tune in, like anybody in the city could tune in. So we had people who weren't taking the course, but they just were interested in learning about Beowulf or whatever we were talking about. And sometimes they would call in as well with their contributions. So yeah, I found that really interesting. And then online courses also began to become more common. And I taught a couple of courses in creative writing with an online platform. So because I was interested not just in the content, and I love teaching 16th century literature, I love teaching literature, but I was also interested in the form, the media that can be used to help people learn. And so bit by bit, I just kind of moved over to this educational development side of things. And then a job came open where I am right now. I'm in uh, two cities that are kind of jammed together called Kitchener-Waterloo, about an hour from Toronto. The University of Waterloo is here. A job became open, and I applied, and I got it. My wife's family is here, so that worked out well. So yeah, I've been here for 20 years, and I might be anticipating a question that you're going to ask, but at my university, in the teaching center where I work, I think that we're in a position where we can, when we advertise for a job, we can almost always ask for somebody to at least have a master's degree. But I also know that there's other universities, other teaching centers, where if you have a BA, um, that will be sufficient too. So it really depends on the university. It depends to some degree on what you have specialized in. And okay, and maybe what it really, really depends upon is if you have some teaching experience, um, if you've got good course evaluations, and if you have some administrators or chairs of your department who can say, yes, this person is a really good teacher, a really good educator, that's really useful too, because the instructors that I work with, that my colleagues work with, they will take us much more seriously if we have some teaching experience of ourselves. Otherwise, it's just like, no, who are you, you educational developer? You just know the theory. You don't know what it's actually like to be in the classroom. And yeah, I think that's a good point. So yeah, maybe that was a question that you were going to ask anyway.
It actually was, and now I don't have to answer. So that's fantastic. Now, one thing I do want to ask you though, and I've asked this to other professors that I've spoken to, but I'm curious if how this changes in Canada.
Mhm.
So, my other professor that I spoke to, we talked about the different degrees needed and how far you can get as a professor if you have a
Mhm.
master's degree versus a
Yeah.
PhD. So, in Canada, do you need a PhD to teach at the university level, or are you limited to being an adjunct if you have a master's? What does that look like for you in the North?
It depends on the university. Like we've got in Ontario, we have what do we call like sort of the big five universities, and across Canada, what would there be? Maybe 12, big universities in total. There's lots of other small universities, like there are universities in Canada, like Bishops in Quebec, which I think maybe has like 1,500 students. At the University of Waterloo, where I teach, I think we've got like 70,000 students or something like that. University of Toronto is even bigger. I would say that even with a PhD nowadays, it can be a real slog to get a tenure track job anyway. I know lots of people who have PhDs and they're in their early 40s and they still don't have a tenure track job. They might be able to work contract, 1 year term, 3 year term, things like that. That's not fun, because it's just so precarious. And there's always roles for others, like lab instructors, for example. But let's say at a small university that has an arts focus, and somebody has a master's of English or French or sociology or something like that, and maybe they've worked in that field as well. Yeah, I think they would be very hireable. Yeah, yeah. So, as with so many things in life, it depends.
It's funny. Yesterday, I was talking to Eric Astor. He's an audio engineer in Los Angeles,
Hmm.
and it was funny. Same thing. I asked him a couple of different questions. I think there were two back-to-back questions, and he said, "It depends." For the first one, the second one is like, "Once again, it depends."
Hmm.
We had
Hmm.
a nice laugh about that. But
Yeah.
it's interesting you talking about the tenure track. I was speaking with Dr. Holly Went at Lebanon Valley College here in
Hmm.
Pennsylvania, and she expressed a very similar vantage point where it's that, yeah, it can be challenging to get tenure. It's very competitive. But she said, didn't want to discourage anyone, just trying to be real with everyone. And that's
Yeah.
that's really cool. I appreciate that perspective
Yeah.
from your point as
And
well.
what if I can just build on that too, like what more and more universities are doing, at least in Canada, I think probably in the US as well, because I think it's a good idea, but they're establishing a sort of second stream of professorhood, which is a teaching stream. Traditionally, if professors are supposed to be not only teaching, but doing research, in whatever their field is. Lots of professors, maybe most professors, love doing that. Our university, for example, I think just 2 years ago, established a teaching stream so that professors who are more interested in just devoting themselves to teaching better and better, they can go into that stream if they want. And it's not considered a lesser stream than the research stream of professor. It's equal. And I think that's a really good idea because different people have different interests and different aptitudes, and the more we can support them, the better.
So let's
Mhm.
pivot. Let's talk about your books briefly. You said there were four. Tell us about them.
Sure. Yeah. I have five published books actually. The first four I wrote going back into the 90s, in the early 2000s, and they were all nonfiction. They were about language and culture and history and things like that. And then I stopped writing for 17 years because my wife and I adopted four older children, and it just they took all of our time. Kids take a lot of time, and especially ones who are adopted as older kids. They come with trauma and things like that. So we had to devote ourselves to them wonderfully. And once they got more independent, older and much more independent, then we were able to sort of turn our attention back to writing. But at that point, I didn't want to write nonfiction anymore. I jokingly referred to my memory earlier on, but it's true. My memory is not what it used to be. And I don't think I have the memory anymore that would allow me to hold, lots and lots and lots of facts all at once and then synthesize them. That would be much more challenging now. Plus, having raised four kids, I was much more interested in writing fiction. So the first novel that I wrote is this one. It's called The Headmasters, and it's a young adult dystopian novel set in northern Canada, northern Ontario. And it's doing quite well. And I've finished a second novel, another dystopian one, but it's not young adult. And I've started a third one.
That is awesome. I speak with Thea Lyons.
Hmm.
She was a business manager in the UK,
Hmm.
and talking about adoption, she talked at the end of her episode. She was talking about how her books have adoption themes, and
Hmm.
I think she said her sister's adopted, her child's adopted. I think
Hmm.
so. It's
Hmm.
neat to hear these aspects kind of creep in and kind of resonate with other episodes. I think that's really really cool. I
Yeah,
love
yeah.
that.
And these aspects all kind of intersect as well because, I've always seen my writing as a way of helping people learn. Anybody who wants to learn. I mentioned open education earlier on. I love the idea of open education, like books that professors create and make available for free, because it means that anybody in the world can access those books and learn from them. And with my novel, The Headmasters, the main character, her name is Maple. She's sort of a combination of all four of our kids, and what they all have in common is a lot of resilience, to come through the stuff they experienced. So all of these things kind of, one aspect of your life, I think, supports every other aspect, or at least one is very lucky if that happens.
That's really neat. I was speaking with Aaron Ryan, and he is a sci-fi author, also a
Mhm.
dystopian setting.
Yep.
And he was talking about how he used his kids, kind of took different ideas from them and transplanted
Yeah.
them into his novels as well. So that's really cool. You kind of take what you know, I guess.
Yep. 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 You learn. You need those early readers to give you feedback.
Yes, yes. Mark, I'm running a little short on time, but one thing I like to do whenever I'm speaking with someone, I like to give them the opportunity to talk about a project they're working on, a cause they believe in. If you want to talk more about your books, I'd like to leave it kind of open-ended, but nevertheless, the floor is yours.
Two things. One really quick. If people are interested in my novels, go to markmorton.ca, CA because I'm in Canada. Um, the other thing, just off the top of my head, would be I've got two dogs over here, two wonderful dogs. I've got two more downstairs, and all of our family life, we have had dogs, four dogs in the house always. We adopted four kids, and those dogs have been so important for our kids, after we adopted them, to feel a part of the family because they felt like they were adopting something. And the love from a dog is just amazing. So I would say that we need to appreciate the relationship, the bond that we have with dogs, not just now, but going back 10, 20,000 years. It's a wonderful thing. We don't really have that with any other kind of animal, not even with cats, I think. So yeah, treasure your animals and get a dog.
Mark, I absolutely love that. Growing up, we had lots of animals in the house. I said this before on the episodes, fish, dogs. We've never had any cats. I have very strong opinions about cats, which I will not put on here.
Yep.
Um, but I love exactly what you're saying. There's no bond like an animal's bond, and I've said that before on the show. That's just awesome. Mark, one thing I will do, I will make sure I get all those links from you. I'll put them in the show notes. I'll put them on the website. They'll be all over the place. So when people are trying to find you, they can easily find you.
Perfect.
Mark, again, it's been absolutely awesome having you on Time We Discuss, and we learned what it's like to be an educational developer.
Thank you, Dan.